Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I'm here today with Glen Livingston. Glen Livingston, Ph.D., is a veteran psychologist and was the longtime CEO of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, which has serviced several Fortune 500 clients in the food industry. You may have seen his or his company's previous work, theories, and research in major periodicals like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Indiana Star-Ledger, the New York Daily News, American Demographics, or any of the other major media outlets you see on his website. You may also have heard him on ABC, WGN, and or CBS Radio or UPN TV. Disillusioned by what traditional psychology had to offer overweight and or food-obsessed individuals, Dr. Livingston spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating via work with his own patients and a self-funded research program with more than 40,000 participants. Most important, however, was his own personal journey out of food obesity. Oh, I said that wrong. Sorry. Out of obesity and food prison to a normal, healthy weight and much more lighthearted relationship with food. Today, we talked about why it is impossible to love yourself thin, how to define a fat alter ego, how to stop justifying the things that don't align with our goals, the top 3 tips that Glen had to stop cravings, the science behind how we are using that innate reward center in the brain when we're feeding those cravings, and so much more. This was power packed, and Glen has promised to come back and coach one of you guys. He has an amazing podcast too, as well as books, both called Never Binge Eating, or I think Never Binge Again. And it was amazing. This was a great conversation, so many nuggets, so many tidbits to help you on your journey to health and wellness. And also, he has this inner critic, which he calls his inner pig. And what he tells us why we shouldn't make a cute name. We want to disassociate from that voice because it's actually destructive. So you call your inner pig you can't call it a cute name like I wanted to, like Inner Piggy. It has to be something that helps you separate from that voice that is on your shoulder. I might call it not your angel, your little devil that sits on your shoulder that says, oh, go ahead. It's not going to hurt to eat another piece of cake, or you can start that diet tomorrow. It was so good today, you guys. I think you're going to get a lot of good out of listening. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode. I'm so excited to welcome Glen Livingston to the Sisterhood of Sweat today. How are you?
I am rocking and rolling. I've been looking forward to this all week. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I love the topic, never binge again. We'll just dive right in and shoot from the hip because
Okay.
I have so many listeners and I own a gym. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, so the Sisterhood of Sweat, many times I have people that have a connection to emotional eating, binging. Um, they have this problem of starting and stopping. And I think I just want to kind of dive into the science of what is binge eating.
um, what really, there are two different answers. There's the answer that the American Psychological Association would give you from the DSM-5, and that has to do with the frequency of eating way beyond your own best judgment with feelings of disgust and loss of control and physical after effects and things like that. And if you're curious, you can look that up and see whether you cross the line or not. I don't really like to use that as a definition, because then people are asking themselves, well, do I need help or not? You know, am I a quote unquote sicko or not? Do I have a, and the methodology we're talking about here is something that's designed to help you if you find that you eat beyond your own best judgment. And I think in our society today, with the industrial foods that are, you know, there are millions of dollars that go into engineering hyper palatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins, and it's all designed to hit the bliss point in your reptilian brain without giving you enough nutrition to feel satisfied. So is it any wonder that we're all looking for love at the bottom of a bag or a box or a container? Is it any wonder that we can take the weekend, read a book, make the best of plans for our health and fitness goals, and then Monday afternoon when you're at Starbucks and there's a chocolate bar staring at you, you hear a little voice in the back of your head that says, you know, gee, chocolate is grown on a plant and therefore it's a vegetable, and so it's really okay. And logic goes out the window, and there you go again. You're starting over tomorrow. So, you know, if you're listening and you're eating beyond your own best judgment, that I would hope that you would pay some careful attention, because there's a lot of misinformation, I think, in the culture about how to stop. There's a lot of misinformation about what it is, and there's a lot of misinformation about the connection to emotional eating, the relationship between emotional eating and binge eating. So I'd love to tell you a little bit about my background and story, if that's okay. So,
Oh, for sure.
yeah, just because I don't want people to think I'm a doctor that just decided to get into weight loss or something like that. I'm a guy who could eat anything that wasn't nailed down. I'm about 213 pounds at the moment, which is actually a little high for me. I've been as much as 280, maybe 300. I stopped weighing myself, so I don't really know. But I was utterly obsessed with food for most of my life. I mean, if you went past the Woodbury Country Deli sometime in the 90s and they were out of Pop-Tarts and pizza, then it's probably because I got there before you. And, you know, because I'm from a family of 17 psychologists and
Oh,
psychotherapists.
wow.
Oh, that's a whole side story. Something breaks in the house. Yes, something breaks. We all know how to ask it how it feels, but nobody knows how to fix it. But because you know, being a psychologist was always first and foremost the most important thing to me. And I had a psychological orientation. And so I thought there must be something broken in my heart. There must be a hole in my heart. And if I could fill that hole in my heart, then I could not have to go chasing to fill the hole in my stomach. And, you know, so I just went to every traditional route you could imagine. I went to the best psychologists and psychiatrists who you would imagine that I knew, because I grew up in and around New York in that family. I went to Overeaters Anonymous. I took medication. I went to nutritionists. I even did my own 40,000 person study on the relationship between stress, different types of emotional stress, and the foods that people eat. We can talk about all that, but I'll tell you up front, and then we'll go where you want to go. I came to the conclusion that it wasn't so much a game of loving yourself then. I really thought I had to love my inner wounded child. You know, I was in a bad marriage, and I had an unhappy childhood in some ways. And the study that I did suggested that people that binged on chocolate tended to be lonely or brokenhearted or depressed. And that was me. It also suggested that people who binged on salty, crunchy things, they tend to be stressed at work. And people who binged on soft, chewy things tend to be stressed at home. But I came to the conclusion that it was more like taking control, like an alpha dog would, of the pack. It's like there was this thing inside of me. There was a piece of my neurology that was overriding my better judgment, and I could take control of it in the same way that you take control of your bladder. Like, Linda, if I really had to pee now, if my bladder was really bothering me, I would say, look, I get it. You know, we'll take care of that. You know, not too long. We'll take care of it. It's an authentic need. I'm not going to ignore it, but not now, not in this way. I'm in the middle of a meeting. You'll have to wait your turn. And I said, well, this is just another biological urge. It's being stimulated by all these big companies. And I was consulting for those big companies. I didn't, I never commuted, and I didn't have kids for, that wasn't really on purpose, but I didn't have kids. So I had a lot of time in my hands. And so in addition to my clinical practice, I was consulting for big food companies and big pharma. And I kind of wish I didn't do that. I was on the wrong side of the war, but I did. And I knew what they were doing. And I knew that I knew it was targeting the part of our brain that doesn't know love. This is really interesting. Like, everybody's walking around thinking, I'm an emotional eater. I eat chocolate because it's a comfort food for me. And then I always say, well, when you go to the dentist, does the dentist say I'm out of Novocaine? I think I'll shoot you with some chocolate instead. There's something else going on besides comfort. Uh, but, but, but um, everybody thinks that emotions are the cause of overeating, but the part of your brain that activates the survival response, that feast and famine response, the sympathetic nervous system, that part of your brain doesn't really know love. It's the reptilian brain, kind of the brainstem, and it looks at something in the environment and it says, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? It's very primitive, like a bad college drinking game. It's eat, mate, or kill. Love comes from the higher parts of your brain. Um, Before I eat, mate, or kill that thing, wait a minute. Let me delay that command, and let's see what impact that's going to have on the people that I love and my tribe. Let's see what impact it's going to have on my longer term goals and aspirations, and my spirituality and my music and my art and all that kind of thing. So um, the part of our brain that loves is not the part of our brain that responds to addiction. The food industry is, run by a bunch of big fat cats in white suits with mustaches that laugh all the way to the bank every time that we're looking for love at the bottom of a bag or a box or a container. And then the addiction treatment industry says you can't quit even if you want to. You've got a mysterious progressive chronic disease. The best you can do is abstain one day at a time. And it just doesn't make sense. Like, it's just a perfect storm to confuse people and get them to keep overeating. So I'm making this kind of a quick story because I know there are other things that you want to do. The way this all came to fruition to me was actually kind of embarrassing. I was not going to publish it. I was working with couples and I was doing coach training. I was not going to be a binge eating doc. Because I had a problem myself for all those years and I felt like it wasn't ethical.
You're like, how can I lead those when I'm having the same problem myself?
Yeah. I just couldn't do that. And so the embarrassing part, despite being a sophisticated psychologist with all these credentials and everything like that, the way I recovered was very primitive. I said to myself, I need to know if I'm going to take control of this organ, this thing in my reptilian brain that's generating these urges, I need to know when it's active. In order to know when it's active, I need a very clear, bright line between healthy and unhealthy eating. Otherwise, I'm not going to know exactly what the urge is. Is it healthy or not that I should have that, extra half a sandwich or something like that? Is that okay? I had a big workout. I don't know. So I decided I was going to make very clear rules. And I would say something like, I will never have chocolate on a weekday again. And that way, if I had a thought in my head that said, gee, Glenn, you worked out hard enough. I know it's Wednesday, but you're not going to gain any weight, or you can just start your diet again tomorrow. Yippee, let's go get some chocolate. I knew that I knew that was my reptilian brain. And it was my reptilian brain. Now, I called it something I probably shouldn't have called it because it was just a private thing. I called it my inner pig. I decided that was my inner pig. I decided that chocolate on a Wednesday in the context of that rule was pig slop. And I would say to myself, I don't eat pig slop and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. This was the earliest iteration of what worked for me. And it wasn't like I didn't suddenly recover and get thin. What did suddenly happen was I stopped feeling confused. It would wake me up at the moment of impulse and give me those extra microseconds so I could make the right choice if I wanted to. And sometimes I made the right choice, sometimes I made the wrong choice. I started experimenting with the rules. I started reading more about the neurology of the the sympathetic nervous system and how you need to switch to a calmer state of mind so you can rest and digest and think more long term. I developed a couple more little techniques for making the jump, making the switch. And I kept a journal of the things that the pig would say because it had very creative reasons.
I love that. That is so great. Writing it down.
Right, because it would say something like, it's just as easy to start tomorrow. You're not going to gain any weight today. But it turns out that the principle of neuroplasticity says what fires together wires together. So if you have a craving for chocolate right now and you indulge that craving for chocolate, tomorrow that craving is going to be stronger. Moreover, the other thing that fired at the same time as the craving for chocolate was the thought, let's start tomorrow. So if you have the thought, let's start tomorrow, and you reward that thought with chocolate, you're more likely to have the thought, let's start tomorrow, ad infinitum. And so the bottom line was, if you're in a hole, stop digging. And that exposure of the logical fallacies of my inner pig's reasoning gave me a great calmness and some additional protection. It took the justification away. I could still make the wrong choice if I really wanted to, but I couldn't make the wrong choice and think it was the right choice. And I kept the journal for 8 years. As I was getting divorced in 2015, my CEO of a publishing company I was involved with, I was a minor partner, said that we needed to write a book, and he thought this was a good time for me to write a book. I said, I have this crazy journal, and it would be really meaningful to me if it helped other people. And I'm going to have to do something else because I think I'm going to close down my businesses. What do you think? Should I turn it into a book? He says, definitely turn it into a book. So I turned it into a book, and I sent it to him. And 2 weeks later, he calls me back. He says, Glenn, donuts are pig slop. I don't eat donuts. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And he proceeded to lose almost 100 pounds. And along the way, we published the book. And now we have over 1 million readers, and it's distributed worldwide in multiple languages, and we wrote 6 more books and all that kind of thing.
How do we define our alter ego inside? Like, why you called it your inner pig. Why is it important for us to define that and then also not call it a cute name like inner piggy?
So this is distinct from Gestalt therapy or parts work or trying to love all parts of yourself. This is learning to identify your destructive thoughts about food. So by definition, we isolate your destructive thoughts about food and we cultivate your constructive thoughts. And so this quote unquote pig or the food demon or whatever you're going to call it.
I think it's a good clarification, really, even though it might shock a few people's sensibilities out there.
It does. I mean, 90% of the people love what I'm teaching and they say that it helps when nothing else does. And then I also get thousands of notes, since we have so many readers, from people that say, thanks, Dr. Sensitivity. So all I have to do is know there's a pig inside of me and then it's going to be all better. Thanks a lot, Doc. But Linda, the key is in the separation. When you can draw that very clear line, and if I decide, and I really think it through what the rule is going to be, and I have people start with one simple rule. If I decide I'm not going to have chocolate on a weekday again, there's a reason I decided that. I thought through about how much chocolate I could have, what would happen on the weekends. I stepped back and I projected out 90 days or so, and I thought, what would happen in my life if I didn't have chocolate during the week? Is this manageable? Would I get the results that I want? Even though the pig says I can't do it, what if I could do it? And so I used my best thinking and I made a kind of a solemn vow to myself. And so that other voice now is kind of like an evil voice. I mean, I'm not a religious person. I'm not suggesting that you're possessed or anything like that. It's a trick of mind. It's just a semantic distinction. But by separating from that and recognizing that this is the part of you that's been destroying your best laid plans all these years, and that it doesn't care. It doesn't care about your health. It doesn't care if you get diabetes. It doesn't care if you have a heart attack or you're disabled from a stroke. It doesn't care if you lose your sexual performance. It doesn't care if you are have all these different types of cancer that might have been diet reversible. It doesn't care. And by cultivating that type of a disgust and recognizing that this part of you is not really human, it's not in your best interest, you can then separate from it. See, and then it becomes less and less a part of your identity. And when you recognize it, you can say, wow, that's not me. What is me is the part that wants to be free of health concerns, that wants to be a tall, thin man who can be a leader in the world and hike mountains and have a loving relationship and, be a good uncle or a good father, or, that's who I am. I'm not this guy that throws it all away on a chocolate binge on a Wednesday. That's not me. When people say, well, this is a part of me that I need to love. This is a part of me that actually protected me when I was a child or when I was younger. I needed this defense when I was younger. I needed to overeat to get away from the feelings. First of all, it's true. We grow out of immaturities, and there are things that we recognize as clearly destructive now that might have served a purpose when we were younger. But that's not how we play this game. Secondly, it's not really true. The relationship between emotional overeating and between emotions and overeating is not as clear and simple as most people like to believe that it is. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, let's do.
So let's take anxiety, for example. A lot of people tell me that they can't get to sleep without overeating, that they're too anxious, and that overeating is the only thing that calms them down enough to get to sleep. And the next day is going to be horrible if they don't get sleep. And I say, I'm really sorry, I understand, and I want you to get a good night's sleep. And we'll talk about all different ways you can work it out to do that. But I want you to know something. When you look at the animal studies and operant conditioning of the correlates of anxiety, the physical correlates of anxiety are things like perspiration, respiration, heart rate, blood pressure, galvanic skin response. When you look at what happens, let's take a baboon, for example, and every time the baboon has elevated blood pressure or respiration, you give it a sugar reward. That baboon, those physiological aspects will calm down very temporarily, but overall, when you take their blood pressure throughout the day, it will be much higher. So basically, the baboon will learn to have higher blood pressure and higher respiration in order to get the reward. So it goes both ways.
Oh, you work in the reward center of the brain.
Yeah. And so it goes both ways. The food, or the pig slop that we call it, is reinforcing the anxiety. It's not really dragging you down. The same thing happens with smoking in people. If people think that smoking calms them down, what it actually does is it revs you up all the time on a regular basis, and then you take a step back down when you have a cigarette. So it's a really false conclusion. The other point is that people think that the emotions caused the binge. It's not entirely true. It is true that when you overload the digestive system, that the nervous system has trouble conducting the emotions. Spend a lot of time, dealing with what's in your stomach. You can't deal as much with what's in your brain and across the rest of your body and your heart and everything like that. So there is a kind of anesthetic effect of overeating on the emotions. However, there's also a high that goes along with that, right? We did not have chocolate bars and Doritos and Pop-Tarts on the savannah. We didn't, fad get Pop-Tarts from convenience store. It just wasn't happening. And so these supersized concentrations of pleasure are not things that we were evolutionarily prepared for. I got a lot of these ideas from Jack Trimpey at Rational Recovery, by the way. So I didn't invent a lot of this, but it kind of came together for me. Now, secondly, let's use a metaphor. Suppose the emotions, maybe this is an analogy, I always forget. My mother was an English teacher and I used to screw the two of them up. She'd get mad. let's suppose the emotions are a fire. You could have a really well-contained fire in a fireplace in the middle of a living room, and that is an asset, not a liability. It could be a roaring fire, and people would gather around it and tell stories and laugh and make memories and cry and hug and kiss. And that's what we call family. That would be the center of hearth and home. As long as the fireplace is well contained, you want that fire roaring. You don't want to dampen that fire. If one ash gets out into the living room, it could burn down the house. So what actually is the cause of the binge is the ash getting out of the fireplace, not the fire itself. If you think of the fireplace as the justifications, that voice that says, gee, chocolate's a vegetable, and then if you fix those justifications so they don't work anymore, then you don't have the pig poking holes in the fireplace anymore, and you can take your time about dealing with the emotions. I still believe in psychotherapy. I still think we're entitled to.
How can we fix those justifications, like that voice, like that inner pig or inner slacker that's telling you start tomorrow, or, oh, 2 bites won't hurt, and all these voices, your inner pig or your inner slacker is that little devil on your shoulder.
Yeah. So can I share my screen? I could
Yeah.
coach you through an example if you
Sure.
want me to.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on a second. Give me a moment to get a. Okay, how do I? This will let me. You have to enable.
Let's see here. Okay.
I'm going to do this the best I can in the time that we have.
Okay. It is not giving me.
Well, I'll just tell you then.
Okay.
I'll just tell you. Let's say we are. Let's say I have the goal. Let me pick something easy. Let's say I have the goal of never going back for seconds. And I had dinner, and perhaps I found myself a little hungry at the end of dinner. I had one plate of food like I planned to have. And I hear this little voice in my head that says, there is no doctor in the world that will say that it's a bad idea to have more steamed broccoli with some sea salt on it. That's healthy for me. It's a cruciferous vegetable. There are hardly any calories. I'll probably even feel better in the morning if I have that. There's no doctor or nutritionist in the world that's going to complain. Maybe they complain about the salt. I don't know. But let's say I don't have high blood pressure. There's nothing to worry about. So I'm going to go get a little bit. Well, first of all, you would be alerted that the pig was active because you made a rule for yourself that says, I will never go back for seconds again. So now you would write down everything that the pig is saying. I tell people to carry a pen and paper around. When the pig speaks up, you say, I see you, pig. You take a breath. You breathe in for 7 and out for a count of 11. The reason you do that is because if you're taking more time to breathe out, then you're probably not being chased by a tiger. There's probably not an emergency, and your brain knows that. So you breathe in for 7. I'm not going to do it now, and then out for a count of 11. Then you say, I like to touch my finger and my forefinger together so that there's a little physical cue that reminds me of all the times I've done this before. And then you say, I see you, pig. Why should I eat that? Why should I go back for seconds and break my rule? And then I write down exactly what the pig said. In this case, it says that broccoli is a perfectly nutritious supplement, and every nutritionist and doctor in the world would recommend it. There can't be possibly any harm in doing that for me. So yippee, I'm going to go get some seconds, even though I have this rule. Okay. So it seems logical. You have to know that the pig always wins by presenting you with a half truth and a bigger lie. So the half truth here is that, and part of the procedure would be, at this point, I would say, well, why is the pig wrong? Why is the pig wrong? Well, the truth is, the half truth is that there probably is no doctor or nutritionist that would say I shouldn't have some broccoli after dinner, just steamed broccoli after dinner. That's probably true. However, what I understand about food addiction, what I understand about how I manage my food, is that either I'm in charge or the pig is in charge. And I find that food addiction is not really an addiction to a particular substance, although it can be.
Yeah.
It's more of an addiction to making impulsive and emotional decisions about food, as opposed to well thought through decisions about food. So if I wanted to change my food plan, if I wanted to change the rule, I've got a procedure for doing that. I would go back and I would say, do I want to allow myself to have steamed vegetables after dinner? So I want to change the rule to say, I will never go back for seconds except for steamed vegetables after dinner. If I want to do that, then I want to write down why I want to do that, why I think that's a good idea. I'll make the change in writing and I'll give it 24 to 48 hours before I actually let it take effect. It's kind of like the legislative process. There are protections and speed bumps in place to prevent us from eroding something that's actually working for us. So I'm not going to allow the decision to be made on an impulsive or emotional basis, because an impulsive or emotional decision leads to more impulsive and emotional decisions about breaking the rules. And see, the pig doesn't really just want to break the rule, it wants to break your spirit. The pig is looking to say, all bets are off, eat whatever you want to, I'm in charge, yippee, let's go to town, at least until the end of the day. And so that's how you do it. And then you say, if you write out why the pig is wrong in the way that I just said, then you say, well, how would keeping the pig in its cage, how would that make me a happier or better person? And this involves some thinking that you had to do beforehand about why you wanted to have the rule in the first place. Like, maybe I wanted to lose 5 pounds in the next month. Maybe I got a pre-diabetes notification, or maybe I just want to have more energy so I could, play with the grandkids or something like that. Whatever it is, you remind yourself of your big why at that point, and you say, oh, well, it's not really about whether broccoli is physically healthy or me for not. It's about conquering this food addiction and being able to play with the grandkids. I'll be a much happier, better person if I just make the change to the rule or just let it go and just don't have seconds like I planned. That's how you do it. You very carefully take yourself out of the reptilian mode. See, writing things down. Writing is an upper brain function, and binging is a lower brain function. Breathing, and then strategically thinking through how the pig is trying to justify breaking the rule and why it's wrong, and why it's better for you to stay on the rule. Remembering why it's better for you to stay on the rule. It's a muscle you develop. You get started by asking yourself, is there one simple rule that I could follow that wouldn't be too burdensome, that I could and would follow and would make a difference? It would point me in the right direction. Don't start out with a whole big diet and, I'm going to lose 10 pounds this month or something. Start out with one simple rule. I'll always put my fork down between bites. I'll never eat in front of a screen again. I will only have bread at a restaurant and no more than 2 portions. Whatever you think would make a big difference that wouldn't be too hard to do. You got to go to kindergarten before you go to college. And you develop this process like a muscle. You develop the habit of waking up when the reptilian brain gets active and saying, oh no, I know where that's going. I know what's going to happen when this thing starts. And you go through this procedure to calm yourself down and put yourself back in the right direction.
Rewire your thinking.
Yeah. Linda, there's one last piece of it, which is that if you're genuinely hungry, you need to evaluate your diet and make sure you're meeting your authentic needs. None of this works if you're trying to starve yourself.
Right. So, Glenn, tell me, what would your inner pig say so people can kind of learn, listen, and identify today? Give me some of the things that your inner slacker, inner pig would say to you.
Well, okay. With regards to salt, I can't have any salt at all. There's a lot of cardiovascular risk in my family. And my pig used to say, well, your blood pressure is fine. My blood pressure is fine. It tends to be a little low. Your blood pressure is fine, therefore salt is not a risk for you. But then I looked up the research and I realized that there's a significantly increased risk of hyperbaric stroke, even if you have low blood pressure with too much added sodium. So that's something my pig would say. My pig might say, you've gotten really good at caging me with all this, never binge again stuff. You really know what you're doing. So you could let me out for a day and just put me back in the cage tomorrow. Or it might say, you know, um, those are whole grains and beans, and it's olive oil. Olive oil, and everybody knows that olive oil is good for your heart. And why don't you have some extra rice and beans and olive oil, and no one's really going to complain about that. That's pretty good for you. Or my pig would say, just one bite won't hurt. Or my pig would say, you're doing really well. You're thin enough and healthy enough, you could get away with it. And as if my health was a big garbage can and the moment was empty, you just got to throw some more garbage in it, as opposed to it being the most valuable thing I'd ever own. Those are some things that my pig would say.
And, I don't know why, but what would the fox say? Just kind of came in my
God,
brain right
what
now.
What would the fox say? Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what would the pig say?
You're going to play that as background music when you publish this.
Yeah, we'll have a little music video.
Yeah.
But you could really do some kind of fun stuff on TikTok with that, I think.
Yeah, no, we're working on those kind of things actually, but I hadn't thought of that.
I know everybody listening right now is identifying so much with what would your inner pig say. And I'd like you to also kind of get into why should we not, because I see how that listening to the pig builds this vicious cycle of beating yourself up later and saying, this all or nothing mentality. And why should we not have an all or nothing mentality?
So there's a lot of confusion in the culture about this. People will say progress, not perfection. And the problem with that is that it is the appropriate attitude if you've made a mistake, right? Because it's like if you touched a hot stove, what you want to do is figure out, how did you miss the stove? You want to feel the pain. You want to feel enough pain that you wake up. So you do want to feel a little bit of guilt or shame, just a little bit. But then you want to say, how can I avoid doing that in the future? What did I do wrong? How did I miss it? And then you want to let it go. Then you need to let the guilt go, because perseverating on that guilt and shame after is only going to make it more likely that you're going to make another mistake. It drains your energy. It distracts you from focusing on the goal again. It would be kind of like saying, oh my God, I'm a pathetic hot stove toucher. I might as well put my whole hand down on the stove, right? On the other hand, let's switch metaphors. If you are aiming at a bullseye at an archery target, Olympic archers, they become one with the bullseye before they let it go. They can actually see the arrow going into the bullseye before they know that their stance is right, and they've pulled, assume the right level of tension, and they've adjusted for the wind resistance, and they become one with. They're not thinking, maybe I'll hit it, maybe I won't, because that energy drains their concentration and drains their focus on accomplishing the goal. You want to stand up and act like a winner as if it's already happened.
Yes.
Commit with perfection. I say we want to commit with perfection, but forgive ourselves with dignity. If you commit with perfection and the arrow doesn't hit the bullseye, then you say, by how much did it miss the bullseye, and in what direction, and what do I need to do to get up?
Strategy.
Yeah.
What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? And how can I fix it?
So what most people do is they've got it backwards. If you think of their two different contexts, there's the commitment tool, and then there's the analysis tool. The commitment tool is perfectionism, but that's not what most people do. Most people say progress, not perfection, as they're pursuing a goal when it comes to food or any kind of toxically pleasurable substance. And then when you make the mistake, you want to forgive yourself with dignity, analyze what went wrong, stand up and aim at the target again. That's not what most people do. When most people make a mistake, they go, I am so pathetic. I'm not perfect. Therefore, I'm nothing. Therefore, I might as well just binge until the rest of the day. Let me dislodge my jaw and go to the
I made one mistake. I effed it up.
Yeah. Yeah. But can you see how that's exactly the opposite of what we need to do? Uh, the forgiving yourself with dignity and moving on after doing a little analysis and figuring out how to do better is really critical. Carol Munter told my ex-wife in an interview that it was impossible to keep binging if you refuse to keep yelling at yourself. And I think the reason she observed that is because, which we observe also, is because of the inappropriately applied perfectionism at the after a binge. So what you want to do after a binge is you want to collect evidence of success. This is counterintuitive, but you want to ask yourself, that I have a 5,000 calorie binge instead of 15,000 calorie binge? How come? How did I manage to stop? How can I amplify that success in the future? What most people do, the questions they ask themselves after a binge is, what's wrong with me? Why can't I stop eating? Well, the questions you ask yourself form the frame of evidence collection for your brain. It's like
Absolutely.
right? Why
Yeah.
can't I stop binging? Gets your brain to look for evidence that you can't stop binging. How can I stop binging? Get your brain to look for evidence
Yeah.
to show you how to stop binging. So what did I do right is the question, always, always.
Asking yourself a positive question, your brain can only answer that in that positive way. And when you're asking it a negative question, it's like I learned this in fitness competitions. Like if I would ask myself, when I do this, what if I fall on my head? I'm thinking all about falling on my head.
Mm-hmm.
But if I ask my brain, when did I rock it before and what did I do?
Mm-hmm.
Like my brain starts thinking about the positive. When did I win before? It thinks about the positive. So it's just the way you ask the questions is so huge.
And then you develop a success identity, because if you're busy looking for success, if you're busy looking for what you did right, then you start to say, wow, there are a lot of things I did do right. 5
I love
cupcakes is
that.
better than 15. Yeah.
And I love the analogy in the book, and I want you to tell it about um, the child that was riding the bicycle up the hill.
Oh, well, I mean, if you had a little daughter, and I have a niece, and she was adorable when she was little. She wanted to do everything, and she wanted to get up the hill on the first try. She wanted to pedal all the way up the hill without trying. I would tell her, you can absolutely do this. I want you to visualize yourself on top of the hill with your hands up in the air, jumping up and down, saying you got a big win. And I wouldn't tell her, maybe you'll make it, maybe you won't, just do the best you can. I would say, you can absolutely do what you're going to do it. Now, if she didn't make it, I wouldn't tell her she was pathetic and awful and she should just give up and just
Because
let
the first try she didn't
yeah.
make it up the
Or,
hill
or,
on her bicycle.
or the 50th try.
Right.
Or the 50th try. I
Right.
would analyze what we can do better each time, and we just keep going. I'd build her up. I wouldn't cut her down. The self-deprecative cutting down voice that we go through after a binge is binge motivated in and of itself. The purpose of it is to make you feel too weak to stop binging. So it's a piercing insight. When you can accept that, you can let it go. Linda, I unfortunately only have another minute or two.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Give me real quick your best 3 tips on quelling cravings.
The only way out is through. The only way to kill a craving is to experience a craving and redirect it. So when I made a rule for myself, I eventually made a rule that I would never have chocolate again. And I haven't had chocolate in years. When I was experiencing a chocolate craving, I would go through the procedure I told you about, but then I would say, does my body authentically need anything? And I would experiment with all these different healthier foods. And it turned out that if I had a kale banana smoothie, sometimes I would juice the kale, sometimes I wouldn't. But there's something about the combination of the chlorophyll and the fiber and some of the sugars in the banana that would just get rid of the craving. It wouldn't get me high the way that chocolate would get me high. Chocolate's a drug. I mean, it's theobromine and caffeine and fat and sugar and all that kind of stuff. So you're not going to feel as wonderful, but you're not going to crash either. And so I would ask myself, what's the authentic bodily need behind that? Make sure you have a crystal clear rule. People think I should just avoid chocolate 90% of the time and eat it 10% of the time. The problem is you don't know which part is the 10% and which part is the 90%. So you have to make constant decisions, and decisions wear down your willpower. So rules work better than guidelines. Make sure that it's crystal clear and that anybody observing you would know whether you followed your rule or not. And the third thing is that it's a lot simpler than it's made out to be. You don't have to solve your inner emotional conflicts. You don't have to contemplate your navel for 20 hours by the river. You can do those things if you want to. I think it's great. But all you need to do is make very practical lines, very bright lines, so you know when your reptilian brain is active, and then take some of these practices and procedures that we talked about and start to work with them so you can develop the muscle of calming yourself down and switching brains at the moment of impulse. So that's what I
I
would say.
love your top 3 tips. That was wonderful. And I just want to acknowledge you so much for providing so much value for the listeners today. And also just being so well versed on your topic. I think you were fascinating. I'd love to have you back to do a coaching session with
Let's do it.
somebody.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Perfect. We'll set it up. And where can everybody reach you and get your books?
What I want you to do is go to neverbingeagain.com and click the big red button. When you do that, you'll get a free copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. It'll also show you where to get the hard copies if you want, but those have a cost to them. You'll get a free set of food plan starter templates. So we've come up with some sets of rules that would work for just about any dietary philosophy. So we work with people on keto. We work with people on high carb, low carb, point counting, calorie counting, whatever you're doing. It's diet agnostic. And the last thing is I recorded a whole bunch of coaching sessions and I want you to hear those. Neverbingeagain.com, click the big red button.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode.
Linda, I'm going to jump off. Just email me, okay?